Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
$8.5 billion is a large number. Could you give some insight into that and some of the causes of those losses?
Sure. We had a very active year for disasters last year in Canada, but we had 4 really big ones in less than 30 days. And what's more, they impacted like 3 of the largest cities in Canada. So we had a major flood in Toronto that was about $1 billion. Incidentally, it was a day after the London, Ontario flooding. We had a flood in Montreal that was remnants of Tropical Storm Debbie from the U.S. And then we had a massive hailstorm in Calgary, the costliest hailstorm in Canadian history by far. It was pretty close to $3 billion. And then, of course, we had the wildfire in Jasper, Alberta, which is sitting in around the $1 billion mark. So super busy year, all in a very tight time frame.
How have things been trending over the past 4 or 5 years in terms of how much natural disasters are costing?
Yeah, so we still have good years and bad years, but the unmistakable trend is upward. And if you project outward several decades, the numbers are really, really bad. We're going in the wrong direction in terms of property damage and disruption due to severe weather events.
We're calling you here from southwestern Ontario, so Woodstock westward to Windsor, and I know that you mentioned some of the flooding that we experienced here late last year. There are tornadoes that touched down. What are you seeing? What are you thinking in terms of where things could trend in southwestern Ontario?
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's not a place where we worry about wildfire too much. It's not a place where we worry too much about hail. But extreme wind events, including tornadoes, are of concern. And heavy rainfall leading to things like basement flooding. Those are 2 of the biggies that we see in southwestern Ontario. And as I mentioned, on July 16th, we had a pretty significant flooding event in London due to heavy rainfall with a lot of basements flooded. On the tornado side, of course, the Woodstock tornado, famous. I think that was 1979, if I'm not mistaken. But we've had other events in and around southwestern Ontario and London, and it's not just tornadoes, just other types of wind events as well.
Obviously, the major news in terms of natural disasters, I mean, they're the hurricanes that ripped through the Mexico region late last year. Obviously, we're paying really close attention to the fires that are happening in California, and the speed and severity with which people's lives basically have been changed forever is so striking here. How exactly can people prepare for an unknown like the fire that we are seeing in California right now? Yeah,
so doesn't matter what hazard you're talking about. So it could be wind or hail or flooding, the various types of flooding, a wildfire, earthquake. There are always actions that you can take to mitigate the impact of those events. And we like to point out that these things should be done before the event occurs and give people as much time to prepare. Sometimes they involve structurally changing a property. If you talk about wind, there are things that can be done, but they're a little tricky to retrofit into a home. There are other things that can be retrofitted quite easily, like basement flood mitigation devices, backwater valves, and things like that. Can be put in fairly simply. We have all the guidance at ICLR.org. If you go there, we have booklets on all the perils and things that can be done to your property to help mitigate the damage. Sometimes the things are a bit costly. Other times they're pretty simple and cost-free. But the list is there, and we really believe that people need to get on with this stuff because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh, I'm going to get hit by a tornado today." It just doesn't work that way. If I had $1 for every time I heard somebody say, "Oh, we don't get tornadoes here," and I'm, "What? What are you talking about?" Or that sort of thing. There's a lot of misunderstandings and things like that. One of the big ones I hear all the time, I'll say to people, "Do you have flood insurance?" And they'll say, "Oh, no, I don't live near a river." Well, you don't have to live near a body of water to flood. If it rains heavily in your area, you can easily get overwhelmed by it. And so people really need an education, but they really have to understand what the risk is in their area and what they're exposed to and what they can do about it.
We mentioned earlier in the conversation that the trend line is pointing in the wrong direction in terms of the frequency of these weather events, the severity of them, and how much they are costing. What do you think in terms of how this might change areas that are considered desirable or habitable, especially considering that insurance companies are taking a second look at what they cover?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the jury is still out. We hear really conflicting information. I can read an article that says people are fleeing the coasts in the U.S. because of hurricanes. And then I'll read another article that says people are flocking towards the coast because it's beautiful. And, it's really, really tough to determine what's going on. We're fortunate in Canada in that the insurance industry is still in pretty decent shape. We're not seeing some of the things we're seeing in the U.S. That's not to say that you shouldn't be careful about what you're buying, where it is located, for example, whether it's on a floodplain, for example, or whether it's in a low-lying area in a city that gets a lot of rain, or a place that's had many tornadoes or at least tornado warnings before. It's just a really good idea to kind of, take notice of history if you can, and kind of determine what is frequent in a particular area that you'd like to buy in, and just kind of be wary of that right now. And sometimes calling local government to talk about basement flooding, is this area that I'm thinking about moving into, is this susceptible to basement flooding, or even getting a plumber to put a closed circuit camera in your floor drain and seeing, what kind of shape it's in before you buy a house. All these sorts of things can really go a long way to making a home more resilient and a homeowner safer.
Well, Glenn, it's been really interesting to speak with you about this. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That was Glenn McGillivray. He is the Managing Director for the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction here in London.